Thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate you. Our last panel of the day. And thank you to our attendees who are still on here as well. I know it's been a long day. Really appreciate you guys. They've also known our journey from the summit. I was talking about it yesterday, but from yesterday, my LinkedIn got banned.
Oh,
So that was our main mode of promotion for the event. So it was a little bit unfortunate with the timing. But I think it fits the theme because I've been sharing kind of my journey through that. And I've learned so much creating the summit. And sometimes that's the only way to do it as an entrepreneur. You have to try it first. Then, maybe things don't go right, but you've learned a lot for the next time to make it successful. So,
Always.
yes.
right.
Well, thank you guys for being here. And I'm just going to start kind of with our summary and then I'll intro you guys and then we'll hop right into the discussion. So, our high performing teams panel, we are going to talk about finding the right talent, emphasizing the importance of recruiting, retaining skilled individuals to build successful teams. This panel focuses on identifying top talent, aligning their strengths with team goals, and fostering a collaborative environment to achieve exceptional results, and also to become a high performer yourself as a founder or an entrepreneur or even just a professional. So we've got our amazing speakers. I'll start with JL Heather. John. So he has 20 years of experience in organizational transformations. JL has identified three key factors driving exceptional success in select group of businesses: empowering culture, transformational leadership, and continuous improvement. He has collaborated with renowned companies such as BML, Ford, Pfizer, Wendy's, T-Mobile, GE, and many others to elevate and accelerate how these organizations create and deliver value. He's a certified professional coactive coach through the Coactive Training Institute, holds the Associated Certified Coach credential from the International Coaching Federation, and is Leadership Circle Profile certified. With hundreds of hours of coaching experience with senior to executive leaders and 2 decades of applying Lean Agile principles to leadership and organization, he has facilitated numerous workshops ranging from design sprints to executive team building. As a passionate and skilled facilitator, JL creates safe spaces for teams and leaders to address organizational, product, or interpersonal challenges and co-create effective solutions. Thanks for being here, JL. And next up, we
Thanks for
have
having me.
Caitlin. Yay! And we've got Caitlin Domer. Caitlin is founder of Virtual Coaching Sales after studying at Oxford University and getting her MBA from Biola University. She launched a sales management company which generated over 11 million in new revenue for its clients in 8 years. She has published multiple books, including The Unseen Sales Machine and Sell with Heart, and just returned from digital nomading to all 7 continents with her 3 kids. And I know this is a little bit of a side note, but on top of everything amazing she's doing, she's also starting another company called House of Healers to help in that spiritual area. And it's a platform aggregating healers around the world. So thanks for being here, Caitlin.
Thank you, Sophia. I know it's a lot of work to host this. You're doing amazing.
Yes.
Oh, well,
Great
thank
job.
you. I really appreciate that. And then we've got John Kennedy. John is a renowned #1 international best-selling author, master executive brain coach, international speaker, trainer, and process efficiency consultant. He has seamlessly integrated his extensive experience in process improvement with a pioneering field he developed, applied neuroplasticity, to create the groundbreaking peak performance program known as the Kennedy Method. From an early age, John was driven by the thrill of solving the unsolvable. His career began with innovative feats, such as developing the first handheld energy efficiency assessment computer in the 1970s. Over the years, he has helped companies innovate through technology and tackled critical problems as a project rescue specialist for some of Chicago's largest businesses. In 2007, he faced his most formidable challenge when the U.S. Marines enlisted his expertise to enhance warfighting capabilities and reduce casualties in combat. This led him to pioneer applied neuroplasticity, an innovative approach that applies his process efficiency methodology to the brain. The combat brain training program born from his work work has proven highly successful, rapidly improving focus, memory, and decision-making under stress for thousands of individuals, regardless of their cognitive starting points. After achieving significant results with the elite military units, including pilots, snipers, and Navy SEALs, John expanded his program to benefit civilians, continuing to drive transformative performance improvements. Thanks for being here, John.
Thanks, Sophia. It's great to be here. Thank you. And with you guys again.
Yay. All right. So to kick it off, how did you guys get into this field of high performance? Because it is a little bit niche. And is there a significant moment or something in your life that led you towards this field?
You want to kick us off?
Well, I'll go actually. So for me, it was kind of, I didn't actually plan it so much. I was consulting and walking into teams, and the demand was for high performing teams to perform better. And so most of my team leading was not actually building a team from scratch, but actually walking into a new team that I'd never been with before, trying to unite them around a common goal and get us to achieve the results that were usually high visibility and very expensive if we failed. So that's kind of how it just started. You solve this problem, that problem, and people kept asking me to solve bigger and bigger problems. And I think I actually enjoyed that part of not knowing who my team would be until we started the first day. But I learned the hard way that the first thing I said, I never came in and told them I had the answers. I said, you guys have the answers. I'm just here to get you across the finish line. And once they opened up a little bit, we were able to kind of meld our culture and so forth.
Love that. I think there might be a trend of, I didn't expect to be here, but here I am, because that's sort of how I fell into it too. It was like, I want to be an entrepreneur. I don't really know how to do that. Somebody invited me to partner with him, and he's like, we're going to build sales teams. I'm like, I can't sell like anything. Like, I failed at selling Girl Scout cookies, and I still have trauma from that. Like, I should not be in charge of this. But inevitably, like, we worked together and we started building these teams, and we created this really unique methodology where we kind of threw people into the work and gave them a couple of weeks of training and hands-on development. And we saw who can actually show up and get the work done and coach themselves through their resistance and master the skills in real time. And at the end of the day, we just got to make decisions about hiring based on performance. And so I really feel like there's this, it was just in sales, you have a very real indicator on whether or not things are working. You're either making money or you're not making money. So it's very hard to kind of bullshit people when there's a very real quantifier of how you're performing. So it was an accidental, found myself building these sales teams, recruiting and then training and then managing these teams, and having a lot of trial and error of what works to motivate people, what doesn't work to motivate people. And so a lot of just, running your head against the wall and going, well, that's 999 different ways to not do that again, and keep trying one more time. Yeah.
And I'll continue the theme of kind of accidentally getting into things. I think I started out in the computer science world, went into project management, spent 15 years in the agency world where it was every 3 months or so, a new team similar to John. And working at some of these big companies and seeing just the focus being on almost anything but performance while demanding value, it just felt like such a conflict that I needed to find a way to get around it. And kind of got into the coaching and the performance side of things, the organizational transformation and design, and slowly worked through there to find a lot of great ways to build teams, motivate teams, and now I'm doing it on my own through Centered. So yeah, somewhat accidental, turned more purposeful towards the end.
I love that. Accidentally falling into things. And that makes sense because, like I said, high performance is a little bit niche. And honestly, I don't even think I would have really known much about it, but I also fell into working for a psychometric testing company, which then that whole language of high performance teams, and I started to learn more about it. And it's definitely a fascinating space, and it can completely transform your business and your life. And that being said, well, one, first of all, anyone listening, please feel free again to drop any questions in the chat throughout. But my next question, what is high performance exactly, right? We hear this term all the time. And what does talent mean? So there's high performance, there's talent. And then what does that mean to a leader? And then what does that mean to the talent?
Small questions. That's it.
Yeah, super loaded.
Well, I think it's interesting. I'd be curious if you polled executives what they would say performance actually meant. I think all three of us have our definitions of it. And I know kind of where I stand is I think most people get it wrong. I think a lot of people view performance as the ability to get tasks done, get their job done. And I've defined performance as people's ability to create value, right? People who create high levels of value on a consistent, speedy basis, those are the people that are performing.
I really like that because I've always kind of joked that one of my superpowers is the fact that I am wickedly lazy, right? I do not pride myself on how hard I work. I do work hard, but it's not, I'm like, how efficiently can I get the best result with the fewest resources, right? And that used to drive my mom crazy. She's like, you're always cutting corners. Turns out in entrepreneurship, you can get from point A to point Z a lot faster than 24 letters, right? So it's thinking through. I love that definition of like, performance is the value you create, not the input that you're putting in. Because I think that helps when you're building a team to really define what is the real goal here. Is the real goal to just keep 8 people busy 40 hours a week? Or is the goal to create value for our clients and to change the world in powerful ways and to produce something that we're proud of, regardless of time invested, et cetera? And I think that can really help you attract the best talented people, because usually the most talented people are not the hardest workers. They don't necessarily want you to just be cracking the whip and micromanaging them and punching the clock. Usually our most creative, most innovative, most talented individuals do not flourish in that kind of an environment. So going into your leadership question, Sophia, it really comes to, ironically, the leaders who can inspire the best performance and attract the best talent typically are just setting the biggest vision and getting people excited about something that's bigger than themselves. I mean, you and I have talked about this King Arthur effect, that King Arthur was not the best knight in the realm, but he was able to attract the best knights in the realm because he said, we're going on a holy mission. We are on a quest to find the Holy Grail. And we are going to come together around this round table. We're going to have brotherhood and equality, and everybody's voice is heard. And you guys are my brothers. And together we are fighting for something powerful and transformational. And so the best and the brightest, of course, wanted to be a part of that culture, of course, wanted to throw their lot in and say, yep, I'm in. So for me, it really comes back to, as the leader, if you want really talented people who are willing to give you everything that they've got, you have to build a vision and create a culture where there's equality and voice and vision, I think, are the two pieces that really come together. Is here's the vision, let me hear your voices, and let's just throw in values as well while we're at it, for right? That we're gonna, this is how we are committed to achieving this big why, and allowing that to really drive the mission.
And I think, Holly, by performance, also the ability to change it. So one of the things as we speak, I'm thinking about our value when companies bring us in to help their, lead their teams. And it's because we do bring a much wider perspective, right? So the value you talk about, JL, it's not just, how many sales or how many numbers, it's the value of the people. And a lot of times the teams I've led, the most valuable people are not the most talented. Do they have the right attitude, right? Do they have the ability to get along with others? Are they willing to put in the hours, not just to get the job done, but to improve as well? So ironically, as we speak right now, one of my clients is leading his team into the playoffs in the Canadian Football League, Trevor Harris, a big game today, Rough Riders. And working with him has been amazing because obviously it's his self-leadership, working harder and trying to be the best quarterback he can be, at the same time inspiring his whole team to follow in his footsteps. And so again, people on a team aren't necessarily the best or the most talented when they start. Do they have the desire to become a better performer for themselves as well as the team? And I think that's one of the things as leaders we have to do is to find that in our people and then give them opportunities, to grow in those ways.
Maybe a framework that kind of brings all this together is something Daniel Pink put together in his book Drive, if you've read it, where he talks about if you really want to motivate and get a lot of value out of people, one of the best ways to do it is start with make sure they understand the purpose they're serving, make sure they have the autonomy to serve that purpose in a way that makes sense to them, that also allows them to grow. So autonomy, purpose, autonomy, and mastery is a good way to look at it. So if you're looking to get high performance out of good people, make sure they have that purpose, and it has to be multifaceted, right? It has to be a purpose for their customers, it has to be a purpose for their business, and it has to be a purpose for them. Give them the autonomy that allows them to exercise their skills and show their value and their worth. And then also make sure that they're challenged. The expectations are set just high enough that they have to stretch to get there. They have to grow to get there. And if you do that, you're going to get the performance you're looking for out of almost anyone, except for maybe a very select few of people who will probably self-select out of that type of culture.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. I love what everyone said. And I was saying this earlier to some of the attendees that it's the opposite of what you expect when you hear high performance. It's not about working more. It's not about working more hours.
Right.
It's completely different. Like you guys are all saying, it's about the value. And so we're going to go into a deeper dive into the details and assessments. So I'll set the stage a little. But when we talk about assessment tests for high performance, so these would be pre-hire assessments like personality tests, cognitive assessments, emotional intelligence, and skills. So a lot of big Fortune 500 companies or venture capitalists or private equity firms are using these to hire. It's a very sensitive space, so you can get sued quite easily. Not a lot of companies are in it. You have to prove the data on a federal level because if you're hiring based on this data, people can easily sue you. And the reason I'm very passionate about assessments and because I learned about in this space was, for example, I came from modeling at the time. And so I had 8 years of modeling. I'd worked in tech. I wanted to get back in and no one would hire me. So with my resume, and I had 8.5 years of modeling experience, but I knew I was smart. And interestingly, it was that company. So they were an assessment company. And it was a gamified version. So it was actually only this 5-minute test because they've found out too, you don't want to have your assessments too long. If it's over half an hour or 25 minutes, people are just going to drop off and not apply. So they did it in this really smart way where they gamified it. I had no idea, never even heard of assessments. So I was like, okay, I'm like applying for jobs. Took this assessment. It was like midnight. I remember pretty much falling off my chair because it was so hard. It was like robots and they were popping up and then math equations. And then it's just getting harder and harder. And I was like, oh my God, I think I got really dumb at like when I modeled for 8 years. I really, really thought that. But then the next morning I had a call, 7 a.m. They're like, hey, can you come in? I went in, they barely asked me any questions. It was the weirdest interview. And then right after they're like, okay, we'll hire you. And I thought, this is so strange. Like, why would they just hire me like that, not knowing anything? But they did. And then after I was hired, then they tell you the assessment results. So it turned out, I guess I was in the 99th percentile. So they know by the data that if you're scoring at that, you are guaranteed to be a high performer. So that was a big impact on me. So someone who gave me a chance based on that, where a lot of times you can't tell by the resume or someone's job experience if they are going to be a high performer. And what I loved is that that also gives opportunities to so many different people. So we had someone, for example, who was working at Sbarro. It's like a pizza place. And he also ranked really high, and he just, right, he didn't have the opportunities to go get an education. He grew up in a tough place. And a lot of people at the company were like that. But because of the assessment test, they were actually naturally very high performing. And then they end up being like he was the highest performing like customer success manager within a year. So this is what I love about the topic, is you can find undiscovered talent. And I actually applied it to my own business. So Maria, who's on today, she was hired. She took the assessments, the gamified version. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting topic, but the assessments, there's a lot of controversy around it too. So that leads to my next question, which for you guys, it's like, what is the best way to hire for a high performer? And are assessments still relevant?
One thing, before jumping into that question, one thing to think about with assessments is what they're assessing. I think you mentioned the legality of assessments, and if you are assessing personality traits, that starts to enter an interesting area in terms of legality, especially when you start accounting for neurodiversity and things like that. If you're assessing knowledge or skills, that's a much different space in terms of what you're looking for, and you're a lot more secure because you can start to tie the results of those assessments to specific requirements for the job. So when you think about the assessments you're looking for, I think there's some criteria you can use to select the things that are right for you and the right level of risk for you, depending on what you're trying to do. That being said, I do think when you're looking for high performers, knowledge and skill are maybe some of the things that may be least important, especially at entry level, even sometimes in advanced levels as well, or senior levels. Because I think, John, you were mentioning it earlier before, a lot of times it has more to do with personality traits and mindsets and behaviors, and you can teach all the other stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So I probably on the other side of this is I was never a big fan of the assessments because, at least within my program, they change. We can change those. I think whenever, again, a lot of times I would have a team that I didn't put together. We had to pull them together around a common goal. But even when I hire people, I find, and again, small numbers of people, right? And what I do probably wouldn't be practical for a larger hire because you've got to sort through all those people. You've got 100 people applying. Those assessments can be very useful, I think. For me, it's always the interview. And a lot of times the interview, I would typically ask them, so, the typical thing is, what's a problem you've solved and how, right? Okay. I would give them a problem. So this is what we're going to be facing in the next 6 months. How would you solve this? And then I always end with a good friend of mine, Bill Burnett, wrote an amazing book about interviewing. And I always leave with the question that he says is most important. The last question I typically ask is something like, describe to me something that you've done in your life that's very meaningful to you or has been very meaningful to people you care about. Because it takes it completely out of the work thought, right? I mean, what is it? It could be, raising a pup. I mean, whatever it is, but it's a way to kind of get a look inside them, what really motivates them. And then that's kind of what we want to, bring into the culture.
I love that. Yeah, and for us, we didn't rely much on assessments, like pre-done assessments. We would ask questions about experience and how would people describe them, so we got a sense for their self-identities. But then, yeah, we would take them into group interviews, and we would just have open-ended questions. And I'm really listening to what do they answer. So for example, what was the hardest sale you ever did and how did you approach it? So kind of big open-ended questions that allows them to tell you what is the answer, but how do they answer? Because you can learn a lot just in terms of how do they interact with one another? How do they, we had to make them raise their hand on Zoom, right? Are you the first one to raise your hand? Are you the last one to raise your hand? Can you not figure out the technology? So even little things like you can be watching a variety of different factors in a group environment setting. And then for us, we decided resumes weren't really that important. If you had a track record in sales, obviously that was going to be great, But when we throw you in the deep end of the pool, do you actually know how to sell anything other than yourself? Right. And so that kind of on the job experience is really helpful. Now, not every role allows you to have that kind of experience, but even when I'm trying to hire somebody new for internal jobs, I like Kolbe assessment, Kolbe, because it shows me how do they work. Fact finder, I want them to be a higher fact finder than I am, so they have a higher attention to detail. In terms of follow through, I want them to have a higher follow through than I have, because I am just as likely to throw a plan out the window as I am to follow it, but I want my team members to actually follow my plan. Quick start, I'm a 9 out of 10. I definitely need somebody who is looking before we are leaping. So just I can balance out what I know are both strengths and weaknesses with a different person. But even then, I would probably say, okay, let's have you start with an assignment. I want to bring you on as a freelancer to do X, Y, or Z. It should take you about 30 days. Here's how much I can pay you for this discrete project. And it allows me to test how we interact. And do we have good communication? Do you know what questions to ask? Do you need me to micromanage you? Because I'm not a micromanager, right? And so I can give us kind of a sense of what is our internal dynamic without having to be on the hook for a salaried employee right off the bat. So trying to figure out, especially if you're a small business, how you can try before you buy in a way that's safe for both of you. You want to make sure that they are financially recompensed for the investment that they're making, but also making sure that you're not partnering with somebody who's not a good fit for your culture or personality.
I think, also to take a little bit of a step back, we're talking a lot about what we do in the moment to evaluate the person. I think there's a step before that for most organizations where they need to consider what is the fit they need. So if you're in a sales organization, each person may operate fairly independently. You may not be as worried about collaboration, right? If you're in a project team, collaboration may be a really highly desirable trait. So I think understanding, what is it that you need in an individual, and then what is it that your team needs? Because then that starts to let you look at things from the fact of, is this person going to operate exactly like this person? And is that a good thing, or do we need more diversity of thought on this team? Because depending on what you're doing, that diversity of thought may be really valuable for you. So I think it's really good for organizations to take that step back in the beginning and understand what are they looking for beyond just the individual traits, but what does the team and the organization need as well? And I think that allows you to make really healthy choices. And it also allows you to provide better context around any assessment you use, because now you can really ground that in, hey, here were the traits we are looking for and why, not only in an individual candidate, but for the team and the organization. So not only does that let you find someone who will integrate better, provide more value, but then if there is a question later about the fairness or legality of any assessments or anything that are used, you have a much more solid case to say, no, here's how it all ties to exactly what we needed. Here's the documentation trail that was led up to this point, and you can really defend your choice. So I think all this stuff is valid. I do think, though, taking that moment in the beginning to really decide what you need, document it, and then go look for it can be really powerful too.
Right.
And I will say, usually small business owners are running around with chickens with their heads off, their hair is on fire.
Yeah.
And it's sort of I'm drowning. So the first person who comes within my reach, I'm just going to put everything onto your plate instead of my plate. And you end up drowning the person who was stupid enough to get close and offer their assistance. So it is, I love that, JL, of just saying, like, be thoughtful, right? I'll ask people like, oh, okay, so you want to hire, who do you want to hire? And they're like, well, I want somebody who can generate leads and close deals and fulfill with my clients and take care of accounting. And I'm like, you just
that's a unicorn.
4 completely different personalities. Like, if we're disc assessing this, you are going to need that unicorn. That's somebody who is perfect at everything all the time. You can't afford that person. Like,
you can't find that person.
Right? The only person who will come and be that person for you is you So let's figure out a different way to say, okay, maybe we just hire the two most urgent pieces. And usually it's like, are you better at operations? Or are you better at sales? Great. Like, let's hire your weakness and get those two aspects of your business stabilized, and then evaluate what's the next step beyond that. And so it's really just making sure that you're not expecting one person to be the savior of your company. That I think a lot of small business owners sort of fall into that trap of not treating it like, this is an organization. Here's my org chart. On this org chart, my name appears in 57 categories. And that's okay, because I'm starting. I'm only going to take 3 of those categories and sign somebody else's name to it. And I'm going to be grateful that I only have 54 now, right? So I think we seem to forget that not everybody is wired like us. You mentioned neurodivergent, JL. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs are neurodivergent, right? We are often going in 55 different directions at the same time, and the same vision and ambition and drive that makes us so powerful as visionaries and entrepreneurs sometimes makes us horrible bosses. So it's like just thinking through, how can I treat myself like a CEO of a future beautiful organization and be really strategic and intentional about hiring what I need in the right order that I need it.
And part of that, I think, when we work with clients is we actually, as you said, that goes back to the emails, remember, where you have all your org chart and your names on all of them?
Yep.
I think it's really helpful if you can get someone else's help with this, right? Instead of having to do, for an entrepreneur, and doing it yourself, get overwhelmed. And basically encourage them to create a framework of all the different areas in their business, right? So they could have sales, they could have marketing, they could have admin, they could have management, they could have production, whatever it is. And then within those frames, define what would be successful in that specific frame, and then what you need for someone to do that. So that you're not just trying to, this big whole, as you said, area you're trying to figure, and then as you said, you prioritize. So which of these frames is the most important? It might be sales, it might be admin, right? Whatever. How do we fill it? Do I get an administrative assistant from the Philippines? Do I hire someone local? But once then you have a target and you prioritize, you'll find that once you fill one of those, a lot of the work for the next one's already been done. You've already been through the process, the analysis process, the synthesis process. And so then you can more rapidly fill the other, spaces as revenue comes in.
Yep.
Yeah, wow. All such great points. And what's interesting hearing you guys speak is it seems like even that first step is analyzing yourself too as a high performer, and then
Yes.
analyzing your company first and understanding that, which a lot of people lack. It's that self-awareness of, where are my skills, and then what am I lacking, and therefore what am I looking for? So yeah, I think that's a important piece. How do you think that's a good way to self-assess? Like either using an assessment on yourself, or maybe even having someone reflect back to you like what your weaknesses are?
For me, it's always been mentorship and coaching. I really need a human to look at me, see my current self objectively, see my highest self spiritually, and say, here's how we can connect these two. And they can hold space for me to be both my best and my worst, and recognizing that it's always a crapshoot, and making sure that they're kind of mentoring me and coaching me and giving me practical, but also inspirational feedback, so that I can be constantly evolving. It's what I love about entrepreneurship is this is soul gym of the highest order, right? That every day you have to come up, get out of bed, face your own inner demons, overcome them so that you can create value and contribute to the world in a meaningful, quantifiable way. And it really forces you to bring all of your stuff up to the surface. So I do think that entrepreneurs' self-awareness and that quest for self-knowledge is more important for us than the rest of the population.
Right.
And I agree a lot with what you're saying about coaching and things like that. I work with a lot of executives in that coaching space. One thing I will say is, for most people, self-awareness requires a baseline. And typically that takes the form of a 360 assessment of some type that gives you some perspective on how you're being perceived. Because when you coach someone, so if anyone works with an executive coach and the executive coach says, hey, I'm going to meet with you twice a month and I'll help you become self-aware, and all they do is meet with you, that executive coach is probably failing you. What you really need is someone who's going to help you get that outside perspective, come to terms with it, integrate it, decide what you can act on, what is just you, what, you know, how you're going to deal with it, and create a real structured growth plan with you. Without that baseline, without that perspective of how you're being perceived by your company, by your peers, you name it, you're kind of shooting in the dark, and you're just kind of really over relying on your perspective, which no matter how good you are, is going to be biased in a large number of ways. So yes, absolutely work with a really good executive coach, but make sure you have that 360 assessment, whatever it is, to help provide that baseline. Personally, I lean into the leadership circle profile. It's probably, in my opinion, the best 360 assessment out there, but there are others, right? You know, I'm going to blank on all the names right now. There's a whole, this is similar to some of the assessments we talked about earlier. There's a whole industry around these 360 leadership assessments, but get that baseline, then use that through your coaching and decide how you're going to adjust and improve from there.
And I think if you're just a single entrepreneur, right, just trying to get started, you can create your own 360 group. Your spouse, your friends, someone who worked with you before would be great,
Absolutely.
right, to give you feedback. You know, and so I think it helps if you define the questions you want to ask up front, but then ask all those people who know you really well. And they've been research, and one of the problems with 360s are very, very helpful, but any type of assessment by a person, typically, if it's a scoring one, typically reflects the assessor as opposed to the assessee, right? And that's why you'll see, like I was just down in a town in Texas, we did a 360s for evaluated them, we were working with the whole, from the mayor all the way down to public works, and you could see the consistent trends of the scores. Right? So some people would be consistently low, some people would be consistently high on their assessing someone else. And so I think, you know, they can be useful, but I think as actually a starting point for a conversation. But I think you have to keep that in mind as well, that it's going to reflect the bias of the person who's taking them.
And I think there's kind of two things to consider with that. One thing I tell everyone that I go through the assessment process with is that feedback is just information. You can't take it personally, and you have to decide what's worth taking in and what isn't. And then two, when you look at assessments, if all you're getting is qualitative data and light quantitative data, that's probably a poor assessment. One of the reasons I like the leadership circle profile, and I promise I don't get paid to to advertise them, it is they normalize the data against a database of tens of thousands of leadership taking this assessment. So it really helps give you not only an idea of what the individual perspectives are, but how you're stacking up against other people. They won't even let you take the assessment if you don't have 5 at least people providing input, but typically they like much more. So John, to your point, when you look at people to take the assessment, you know, people close to you, past clients, trusted clients, people that know you from past jobs, all that sort of stuff. You do want to get that broad stroke, and you want to be able to have some stratification to the data so you can kind of understand, hey, people who see me in this role, this is what they think. People who see me in this role, this is what they think. And it really helps give you a lot of different perspectives. And I think done right, those 360 assessments can be a treasure trove of information that's actionable. Done wrong, they can take you down a lot of really confusing paths. Right. But I think it's worth working with someone who's done it, who knows how to interpret it and talk through it. And honestly, I don't think I've ever worked with anyone or met anyone who went through a good version of that wasn't happy they did, regardless of how much they paid.
What was that again? Leader circle profile?
Yeah, leadership circle profile.
I've already went and Googled
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Like, I want to take that.
Cool.
If you want to take it, let me know. I can
Yeah.
help.
Send me your affiliate link.
Yeah, it really is. It's so important to self-assess. And I think it's also super empowering because now you understand yourself. And I know it was for me too. So even for me having that perception of myself, like, oh, I must have gotten, not as smart during modeling. And I had this like self-conception. But then when I started working there, I thought, oh, wait, I'm actually smart. And having that encouragement and knowing my strengths. And through that too, so we took, just for anyone listening, so cognitive doesn't necessarily mean intelligence, but sort of. So you're kind of looking for attention to detail, how open is someone, how trainable are they? So those are kind of indicators of a high performer accordingly to a cognitive assessment test. But then, like everyone was saying, your personality is equally as important. And so that was fascinating for me to understand my personality, which I don't think I would have been able to verbalize that or put it together. So my personality showed that when I was very open, very adaptable, but that I can get very bored easily because I'm a high performer. So I have to be consistently challenged. And so then the company was able to understand that about me. And then they were consistently putting me on new special projects because they understood that. And so that was also very interesting to observe within the company that they were really actually individualizing how they treated different talent based on those personality assessments. And I think that's, super powerful and fascinating. So anyone listening, I highly recommend you guys go self-assess yourselves so you understand better. But yeah, and my next question, I heard you guys also say a lot of keywords like attention to detail. And so would you guys say those are typically the qualities that you're looking for as like a base people?
So, I mean, if you look at the research, the number one predictor of high performers is emotional intelligence, hands down. Over the course of their career, they'll end up earning $30,000 more a year. With a high emotional intelligence, they'll typically outperform more than 90% of their peers if they have a high emotional intelligence. So I think if you're going to only look at one dimension, it's that emotional intelligence, that self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, social management, or self-management, social regulation. Sorry. Like those are the four typical quadrants of emotional intelligence. It varies a little bit depending on which kind of book you read, whether it's Amy Edmondson or like Emotional Intelligence 2.0 or whatever, but it's kind of the same. But that is probably the number one predictor of performance and success in a person's career.
I didn't know that statistic.
I would
That's
agree.
awesome. But I will say emotional intelligence can be learned because I was
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
most awkward nerd you have ever met in your life. I would go to parties with a book because I just didn't want to talk to you. So yeah, I started high on the IQ and then I realized, oh, the people who are doing the successful things that I want to do, they learned this game that I want to learn how to play. And I started like studying humans like an alien, like what them tick, right? And like reading books and like studying behaviors and going, oh, so that's how I'm supposed to say hi and I'm supposed to smile and hold out my hand. Good. Okay. Learn that skill, right? So it is interesting that if you are the sort of person who wants to be a high performer, you will sort of find your way. So it's I guess what I'm trying to say is I wonder if EQ is a cause or an effect. Like, is it the people who naturally want to be high performers realize that in order to perform, collaboration is necessary. In order to make collaboration necessary, I need to figure out how to get people to like me, right? Or are people like naturally good with humans and so they just inevitably have good careers? Like, I would be curious about that.
Yeah, the research shows that at the end it doesn't really matter, right? Because whether you've learned it or you are a natural at it, that was part of that was the majority of what made you successful, especially when you start talking about leadership, executive sponsorship, things like that.
Well, the
And the nice,
corollary is if you want to be more successful and be a high performer, prioritize emotional intelligence mastery.
And the nice thing is coaching is one of the best ways to improve your emotional intelligence The other nice thing when you start doing these other 360 assessments and things like that, you're going to hear things you don't like.
Oh,
And
yeah.
a really great way to develop emotional intelligence is to watch your reaction
Mm.
to assessments that tell you things you don't like. And going into it knowing like, hey, not only do I need to understand what this assessment is telling me, but I'm going to listen to my reaction and see what's happening in here. That's a really great step in terms of emotional awareness and intelligence. And then it's great practice to build that emotional intelligence. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about is going to take you down that path regardless. And sorry, John, I think I talked over you.
Oh, that's fine. No, this is great. It's great. So, and actually, this is great because one of the reasons that when we do our program together, it improves emotional intelligence so quickly is because they're not there for emotional intelligence. They're doing a team exercise. They want to think faster, and that's what they're there for. But there's some cardinal rules that we have when we go through the program as a group. One is you don't stop for mistakes, right? And you don't fix mistakes. And two is you have to sync up with everybody else. So if you're slower, you have to go faster. If you're faster, go slower. So just in the course of doing that, we have CEOs and janitors. They're doing it together, right? And one makes a mistake, and hey, it's okay. So it's okay for me. It's okay for him to make a mistake. And they start to sync up, and so they really experience all components of emotional intelligence, but they're not even realizing it. But once that happens, then their brain has changed, and then that's going to improve their emotional intelligence. But from our perspective, the way we learn the most effectively is modeling from others and interaction with our environment, which could be others, right? That's why when you work with the most effective ways when you work with your clients is to actually give them an example of what they could say. And it's like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, you just modeled for them what they need to do. I just did that with my clients earlier today. Now they get it. So modeling, but that experience of interaction with others, I think is really huge as well, because that's where without it, unconsciously, you're actually making those neural connections that you're not aware of, but they last, they stick.
Well, and the fun part about what you're saying, John, you're talking about emotional intelligence now as a group skill rather than individual skill. And if you've never heard of Project Aristotle, you should go look this one up too.
Okay.
It's one that Google did where they looked at all their teams and they asked the question, what is it that makes some teams high performing and other teams not? What is the quality that we want in these teams? Like, how do we recreate high performing teams on a regular basis? And the only consistent answer, statistically significant answer they found was psychological safety. So when
Really?
teams have psychological
Oh,
safety, they will become high performing. And there's a lot that goes into that. But the foundation of all of it is everyone on that team has to be emotionally intelligent. If they're intelligent, if they're
yeah.
not, psychological safety fails. So when you
Interesting.
look at this, when you think about hiring for performance and value and all this other stuff, one of the big things, one of the big reasons you look for emotional intelligence is if you bring a team member on that doesn't have it, the psychological safety plummets and people start hiding mistakes, people stop collaborating,
Interesting.
all these things go wrong,
Huh.
and you're just kind of out of luck. And that's the other reason you can't really tolerate a non-emotionally intelligent person on your team. Like you have to fix it in one form or another because
Yeah.
it's the bad apple effect is kind of the way people talk about it. There's a whole Harvard study that talks about bad apples and good apples. It's also really interesting. But
Huh.
once you have that bad apple, they will bring the rest of the team down with them unless you fix it
Yeah.
and address
Yeah.
it.
That's fascinating. For me as a mom, I was like, huh, the key to success is psychological safety. Like, I feel like you just boiled my job as a parent down to a single 2-word phrase.
Yeah.
Your job as a parent is to create psychological safety. Like, ah, well, that's a lot simpler than making sure
Yeah.
that they eat their vegetables and finish their homework.
Well,
So
so
now I
here's a
kind of,
good thought experiment. Think about it this way. If you had to go to the emergency room and the paramedic leaned over and he goes, I could take you to one of two places. This place over here, every month they have 100 incident reports that come in. And this one over here, they have two a month. Where do you want to go? Almost everyone says, oh, take me to the one that has two. That must be safer. And it's the exact opposite, right?
Right. Right. Oh,
100,
that's some
because there
experience.
people feel safe to raise issues and get them fixed.
Yeah.
In the place, they're hidden, right? Because there's no chance in two different emergency rooms incidents don't happen. It's
Right.
just where are
Right.
they actually looked at and fixed and
Mm,
where are they hidden?
that's
So when you think
great.
about this concept of psychological safety, it's like how willing are people to communicate? How willing are people to raise the issues and actually participate in fixing them? it's a powerful thing, whether you're a parent or a leader. And honestly, most people are both in one aspect or another of their life.
They are parallel skill sets. Like,
Right.
don't think about it.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think psychological safety totally sums it up. And that's exactly what I experienced at that assessment company. So it was the most insane experience to me. It was like everyone had high cognitive abilities, was scoring high in their personality fit for their role, had high emotional intelligence. And so working there was like a dream, and everyone was so efficient. Exactly. There was tons of psychological safety. Everyone was encouraged to speak up, no matter if you're an entry level. It was just so open. And that was really why I'm so passionate now about high performing teams, because I understand the massive difference that can make when your entire organization is that way. And also to see the data. So one of the case studies I love to do when I was working there was they found, so for example, for salespeople, so the data showed at least that cognitive intelligence and personality fit were the highest correlator. And then they found that third was emotional intelligence, overlaying that as like a third, but to do it initially. So the case study showed that if someone scored high in personality fit, but not cognitive, they were making about 50,000 in sales per year. Then someone who was doing high in cognitive and not personality was making about 80,000 in sales per year. But when they hired someone who was high in both cognitive and personality, this person was making $140,000 in sales a year. So that's four
Wow.
times more. So they found, yeah, that a high performer can be 4 times more efficient. So it's like, just imagine the revenue for your company just by hiring one
Yeah.
of the right people. And so even my team is small, but I hired everyone for that. So, sometimes I feel like each person is equivalent to 4. So we're able to get a lot done. But yeah, it's really a game changer once you understand what high performance means.
And it's
Wow.
interesting. We've used the word fit a lot here. And I think, when you look at this concept of psychological safety, I think it was Brene Brown who talks about this, like fitting in is not belonging, and belonging is the founding rung of psychological safety. So you typically look at psychological safety as do I actually belong? Do I feel safe to contribute? Do I feel safe to educate? Do I feel safe to contribute? Do I feel safe to challenge? Belonging, that first rung, it is fit. We talk about it a lot and we want people to fit in, but that's actually typically the opposite of belonging, right? What we have to do in organizations is not help people fit in, but help them come as their authentic self and make the diversity okay, right? So I do think when you look at hiring, we have a tendency to hire people like us or who fit in with the team. And I kind of mentioned this
Interesting.
earlier. It's equally important to hire people that actually don't fit in, but do belong.
Right.
And that's a really key difference in all of this that leads to a lot more value and a much higher potential for your team as you grow.
Very good.
Yeah, so true. That even applied to me where I was saying, they were like, oh, she needs to have lots of projects constantly. And it really helped me understand, because in the past I would get depressed because the company, you just have one role. And even though you started out killing it, but then suddenly you're bored and you don't understand that about yourself. But yeah, so exactly, you need to individualize your talent program to each person and what fits them, which, kind of leads me to the next question. I think one, assessments are expensive. So anyone who's listening, like really good ones, like if you really want like data-driven ones, maybe you can find free trials, but it's a little tough. So if you're, just starting out as a solopreneur or you're trying to bootstrap, probably your best bet is going to be to ask the right questions in an interview. I know one of you guys said that earlier, that interview is super important. So how do you guys identify for these qualities, through the hiring process if you're not using assessment tests?
Well, first, there are some cheap, maybe even still free EQ, emotional intelligence tests out there. Uh, some of them, the quality can vary, but they're directionally okay. I'll let anyone else take it from here, but I just wanted to throw out there are some decent, low cost, if not free options in that emotional intelligence space.
Is it ever, sorry, just a question, big piggyback off that, because we had that problem where there's also a concern that someone could give the test to someone else. So they'll have like their friend take the assessment. So
Yep.
that person has like higher intelligence or emotional intelligence. So in some ways, then you have to try to validate that in that interview or hiring process to make sure.
I think that kind of falls under the canvas of assuming good intent and understanding that bad actors like that are actually somewhat rare. We tend as human beings to focus on instances that are highly negative as common because they stick out a lot to us. They're painful, and we're wired to remember the painful things. But more often than not, people are acting in good faith, especially for simple assessments. Like if you go in and say, "Hey, I'm going to test your math knowledge and your ability to code." All right, that might be a little bit different, especially if it's really big. But if you're like, hey, can you take this 15-minute emotional intelligence test? We just want to get a baseline to help us understand how you're going to be able to fit in and operate within our organization. Most people are going to be what we consider a good actor in that scenario. And I think it's worth extending some trust there because when you look at the assessment results and then go through the interview, if they don't match up, you're going to feel that. So I don't typically worry too much about that.
Yeah, for me, without, questions. So again, the best hire I ever had was my current director of training, Tim Stewart. He's just incredible. And what I learned when I was interviewing him, and what I try to do, and we kind of talked about this before, is I want a broad picture. So if I'm hiring or helping someone hire a salesperson, all their sales is great, but what else do they do with their life? Do they volunteer and coach their kids' little league team, right?
Yeah.
Do they volunteer at the local, I'll call anonymous or something, right? I mean, what do they do outside of work that they can bring in? Because if they're coaching their kids' teams, are going to be patient. They got to have a strategy, right? They got to be able to pull people together and lead them. So I think that without an assessment, that's the kind of questions I would try to focus on. Try to get a fuller picture of the person that you're trying to hire.
Interesting you said that because I discovered accidentally that black belts in any martial art, I will hire them on the spot to do sales. I don't even care if you have a single experience in sales. If you tell me you have a black belt in any martial art, I will hire you immediately because I discovered it's the perfect combination of competitive, coachable, disciplined, that trifecta will always succeed, assuming they're extroverted. Okay, so I need an extroverted black belt. But if they like humans and they've mastered this martial art discipline, I can turn them into a salesperson. I'll probably start them at appointment setting, and then I'll move them into closing, and eventually they might even decide that they want to be management. But it is interesting how they're it sort of happened. I kept getting people who were remarkably good with zero experience. And I'd be like, tell me about your rest of your life. And they're like, oh, by the way, I have a black belt. And I was like, by the third one, I was like, done.
All right, if I ever need a job, then I'm coming to you then.
Right.
So it is just interesting how if you do this enough times, you will start noticing trends and clusters of data points that you can start drawing on. It's fun interesting because I'm thinking of your question, Sophia, and I'm like, well, we don't do an assessment, but they have to send us a video. So we do a screening. So I guess screening is step one. How are you screening all of the applicants? Then we do an interview. We have that open-ended question. I realized, John, one of our questions is, what's your proudest personal achievement and what's your proudest professional achievement? And it's remarkable how that will tell me their values.
Right. That's good.
And then the really is the actual performance, the actual doing of the thing. And what's interesting on us is what we tell them on the first day is we're looking for two factors. Quantifiably, are you a good salesperson? Can you close deals? But qualification wise, are you a good team member? Are you a good communicator? Are you supporting your fellow team members, or are you sabotaging them to make yourself look good?
Right.
So we tell them on day one, we don't care if you're the best. I have intentionally not hired my best salesperson because they were assholes, right? I don't need that.
Right. Don't hire assholes.
Right? Rule number one. But then the second thing was and then by seeding that was important, it was amazing how during our 2-week trial, people showed up differently when we said we're looking for people who are team players and are supporting one another, and collaboration is a key value for us. We got them coaching one another, making training videos for one another, encouraging one another in the chat. So something as simple as saying, this is our core values that we are evaluating for, can actually start creating that culture from day one, especially when they're trying to earn their place on the team. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't really use assessments, but it's sort of, I'm realizing that's sort of our framework is screen, interview, test, and then analyze the feedback we get.
I would extend, I love about the black belts, but I would extend that to the military as well, because so many military, I mean, they'll learn anything, right? They're up early, they work hard, they follow orders, they're creative. Some of the military vets we've hired have been by far the best people to work with. They know about teamwork, right? They know about values. So I would definitely, hire vets.
Yeah.
And that's an opportunity.
One build I would have on all of this, we talked a lot about the questions you ask an individual. I think when you look at the people who are going to slip past that, they tend to fall in this category of people who have the dark triad of traits, which it's narcissism, Machiavellianism, and one other, and I can't remember what it is. But a lot of times those things combined make it really hard to detect those kind of like bad apples sneaking in. One of the best things you can do, and I'll give you an example, an in-person example that I've seen that works really well, but there's a whole bunch that work remote. They would take interviewers out to lunch, right? So they'd meet them at the office and they'd be walking out and they would have little things like trash on the ground, or did they hold the door for someone, or things like that. So in those moments where it was someone who didn't matter to the decision of do they get hired or not, how did they interact with that person, right?
Right.
When there was a problem where they could help, did they jump in to help? Like if the waiter had a problem with the ticket or whatever. So, when you're interviewing someone remotely, you can be like, man, sorry, I can't get my screen to share. I don't know what's going on. Do they jump in and help? Do they sit back, right? If you let the meeting start a little late and let the front desk person say, hey, so sorry, he'll be here in just a minute. What can I do to help, or whatever, and see how that interaction goes and things like that. So like create some of those situations where you can really hopefully see kind of their true self kind of come through and see how they interact. I think that can be really powerful, because if you ask someone some of these questions, especially as they're later in their career, they're ready for them, right? They've had a version of it before and they've rehearsed their answer to the point where they can make it fit your question. And it can be a little bit tough at times. So while those questions are great, every once in a while they're still going to fail. And I feel like sometimes you can take a book out of that psychological experimentation where you have that blind test going on where they don't quite know they're being tested, but they are being tested.
You just inspired me. Someday when I have a big company and we have a hiring day, I want to be the woman completely all frizzed out, junk robes, mopping the floor, and I want to pour water accidentally on all of the interview's shoes, and I want to see how they react, and that'll be the interview.
Like if you walk by and you drop your papers, do they get down to help you pick it up, or they're like rush to keep up with the guy doing the interview? Like all those things matter.
Yeah.
So I think that's always been a really brilliant way to kind of spot the good apples.
Yeah. Undercover boss, here we come.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's a great show.
So it sounds like it's
I remember reading about. He had his wife be the receptionist when the new people would come in, right? So she would tell him exactly what they were like when no one else was around. But yeah, these are great ways to catch them when they're not aware, not expecting it.
Yeah, so many great tips. I think if you can do the whole holistic approach, if you can do an assessment, try to evaluate them in person, see how they're behaving. I love what Caitlin does, her 2-week boot camp, where that way you actually get some time with them and you can see how do they act, how do they interact as a team. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to kind of figure out what a person is like. And I love, Jael, that you brought up the dark triad personality disorders, because I post about this sometimes on LinkedIn, and I'm super passionate about it too, because really you could get just one and it can destroy your company.
Yeah.
You know, one bad apple, and it's very hard to identify them. So even in assessment world, there was kind of a weird triangle of 3 traits that you could see. So one was like if they hide really high in neuroticism, and then there was another scale of like either selfishness or selflessness. So if it's like if they were high on that, and then also if they were super aggressive, which again, usually those traits are good, but not if like all 3 were high. And then that would be kind of an indicator that most likely they might be, which again, a little tough to say. You can't really base it off an assessment, but yeah, you definitely want to be keeping an eye out for that. Yeah.
So funny. I'm feeling into all of this and I'm realizing like, I want to work someplace fun. Like if I could just bring this all down to like a single word, like if I could create this place where it is fun to show up, like for me as a high achiever, like that would be the right combination. Yep, there has to be safety, but there also has to be creativity, and there also has to be humor, which means that there's emotional intelligence. And like, it's just, like how do we create cultures of fun? And JL, you mentioned purpose, like this purpose combined with fun. If you can get this kind of Taoist approach.
Well, there's a word for that, right? Purpose with fun and some of those other things, it's fulfilling. So a lot of times what people will talk about is fun as an element, but when you really have a workplace that provides fulfillment, that's where people stay, right? And that really does mean they have to serve a higher purpose. They have to have agency to be able to do the things they want, and then they have to be able to grow. If you aren't doing those 3 things, you won't be fulfilled. And there's foundational things like psychological safety that have to be there for those things to happen. But you said fun. The word I typically use is fulfilling, right? And you can't be truly fulfilled if you don't have fun from time to time as well.
And you can encourage that. One company we work with, the company would actually give everybody money, like $50 or something, but then they had to do something with it together as a team for the company that was going to be fun. So that might be planning a trip. It might be doing something for the kids. It might be, getting everybody clown noses or something, right? But so the company provided the resources and gave the people the incentive, and they came up with really creative stuff that was fun. And of course, everybody couldn't wait till it was their turn to do that. So
hackathons or different versions of hackathon, depending on the industry, like that's a great way to personify all 3 in a fun way. And then it also spawns innovation a lot of times, and it highlights high performers that maybe you didn't know about. So I think creating those sorts of things, design sprints, hackathons, things like that, are a great way to kind of build some of the fulfillment in a small, fast way. And then also be able to kind of suss out where are your high performers, where are the people that have more potential that maybe you hadn't seen before, because now they have a different problem and a different time constraint to work under.
Right.
Yeah, wow. So many interesting insights and tips. So I know we're getting close to time, so I'll just say again, Roger, Sandra, Ahra, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. And in the meantime, I'll ask, one last question where I think you guys covered a lot already. But what are some tips or action tips for someone to become their own high performer? Like, how do you continue to become more of a high performer? And continuing to elevate your company towards that. And I guess while I'm here, I still have your sheet, John, so I'll just show it really quick. So I still have this on my desk. So this is the Kennedy method. So this is, brain training, neuroplasticity. So the way we did it, it's like first you go, I think it was like, first we did colors, or no, it was the directions.
Well,
right,
the first was exactly. The first was to identify color and direction, right? 2 different decision stream data set. And then we went all the way through the direction, and then we continued to make it harder. And each time brings in more parts of your brain, right? So, and it's based on research from MIT that found this will start to change the brain immediately. So that's why, and I love doing this because individually, I work with clients individually, their performance improves significantly, like my quarterback, Trevor, but in a team, the same thing, right? What we were talking about before, bonding together. But I think anytime you're high performers, they're going to be the kind of people that are going to invest even on their own in improving their performance. So mine is obviously one way to do that, but there's a lot of things, and I think that's the attitude that we want to incorporate in our high performers is a self-motivation to improve.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting because even if you look at, it was like Tom Brady or something, I think throughout his whole career too, he was like constantly taking cognitive tests. So I think it
Yeah.
is an area you want to focus on if you want to succeed or go to that elite level in any profession.
So just an aside on that, because I can't resist. So when I work with Trevor, the first year I worked with him with those exercises, his quarterback rating was 10 points higher than Tom Brady that year. So I got Tom Brady beat, but so whatever he does. So
Love it. Love it.
It's interesting though. Like I think when you think about like that neuroplasticity, that's important. And there was a period where there were a lot of apps out there in the app store, various app stores about building neuroplasticity that did things very similar to what you're talking about there. And I have seen those apps kind of fade away to some extent. But I think the theme behind them, that idea of self-improvement,
yeah,
that's the valid, like consistent thread through all of it. So when I
right.
think about what do you want to do, there's two things that really come to mind to make yourself a high performer. One is constant self-improvement, right? So understanding
Yeah.
where you're at right now, understanding where you want to be and what the gaps are. That's huge. If you don't have that, you're sailing blind. The other thing is burnout is working really hard for something not aligned with your values and something that you don't really care about. Passion
Right.
is when you're working for something that is absolutely aligned with your values and something that is your purpose. I am always shocked by the number of people who don't understand their purpose and who don't really have a good insight into what their values are. So if you want to truly do the one biggest thing that's going to make you a top performer, understand your why, to steal from Simon Sinek, and then understand your values. If you do those two things and you start aligning your work and your life around those, your performance is going to double, triple beyond, right? So that first, then start looking at the self-improvement, the neuroplasticity, whatever area of that you need to dig into, that's awesome. Make sure you do the other stuff first, that values and purpose. If you don't have that, all you're going to be doing is spinning the hamster wheel faster towards burnout.
And repeating that's a neuroplasticity. By the way, the reason those games fade out is they don't work because we talk about interface with the environment. You just look at a little screen.
Right.
You get better, but it's not changing. But when you're talking about everything you repeat, so once you have your why, you want to reinforce it with repetition, right? And neuroplasticity
Absolutely.
is what will make those ruts deeper
Yeah.
and improve your success.
More wrinkles in the brain.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's right. Yeah, I think I just want to double down on what JL was saying because I was thinking through when am I at my own peak performance? And it's when I am passionate about the work that I'm doing, right? It's necessity for flow state, right? Like when we can access that passion and I know I keep coming back to purpose and fun, but for me, those are my values, right? I need to be purposeful, right, is my yang, we'll call it, and fun is my yin. And for me, it's constantly like feeding into that loop of, am I doing something that matters and I'm enjoying myself? Not even necessarily like, I think fun might come across as frivolous, but for me, like designing a spreadsheet can be fun, right? Like, so it's where am I feeling creative and alive and excited and passionate, and also playful, right? Like there's a certain lightheartedness that good work feels when you're aligned. You can take the mission seriously without taking your role or this task seriously, that I think really allows you to have that freedom to try and fail and try and fail. And right, I think that's there's a Winston Churchill quote around that. It's like enthusiasm is being willing to like fail and get up with as much, and I'll look up the quote.
No loss of enthusiasm.
With no loss of enthusiasm, yes.
There you go.
Right, so we just keep getting up because we're passionate about this thing, and it doesn't matter if it's hard. I'm willing to change myself for the sake of the mission. rather than change my vision for the sake of protecting my ego, which is what I think so many people do.
Yeah.
It's, well, it's hard. I'm just going to shoot lower,
Yeah.
right? Instead of I'm going to raise myself higher, you know?
And Caitlin, by no means did I mean to trivialize fun. When I talk about fulfillment, it's what we typically call an umbrella term.
Yeah.
What's fulfilling is different to everyone,
Right.
right? For some people, if you said, ask what's fulfilling, is it fun? And they would scrunch up their face and be like, well, no, if it's fulfilling, it has to be hard. There's nothing fun there. It has to be a challenge. If I'm not sweating, if I'm not putting in effort, then it's not fulfilling. There are other people that are like, man, if I'm not having a blast, why am I there? Like, what, life's too short.
Yep.
So understanding your values is a path to fulfillment.
Yep.
And for you, understanding purpose and fun is this yin and yang. Like, there's no purpose without fun, and there's no fun without purpose. Like, that's really powerful, right? That helps you be fulfilled. Understanding those values for yourself leads to fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I think everyone on this call has different values that they need to understand so they can do that same thing.
Absolutely. And I know Caitlin has a hard stop, so we're going to let her go. Thank you so much, Caitlin. I really appreciate
Thanks, Caitlin.
your
It's good to
insights
see you
and
again.
help.
It's fun.
Thank you. And then we did get one question, if you guys have time. It came from Roger. What would the focus be on generally in an interview? Someone being able to do the job or fitting into the company culture?
You want to rock, paper, scissors? Who goes first?
Well, you kind of have to have both, right? So someone can do the job and not fit in the culture. Like you were talking about the bad apple. I love that analogy. I'm going to look that up. Someone can fit in the company. Maybe, I don't know, see what you think, Joe. Maybe fitting in the culture is more important if they're willing to learn what they need to do to be able to do the job, right?
Well, and fit in is such a loaded term, right? The idea is,
right,
if you have a culture where fitting in is critical, that's not a good culture.
right.
But what you need when you look at fit is are they going to be able to come do the job and create value in a team that is beyond what they could have done individually, right? If the answer to that is yes, then that is what I would consider a good fit for your organization, regardless of whether or not they're going to create some friction, because some friction is good. And I think sometimes we can over-index on this concept of fitting in to the detriment of belonging and psychological safety. So I think the first thing you want to ask is can they contribute at a higher value with the team than they can as an individual? And are they going to be able to match the values of your company and align with the purpose of your company? Outside of that, the skill that, if you're talking entry level, I would be really impressed if you could point to an entry level job you couldn't train someone to do. These days, especially, like, there's so many ways to do that. When you start looking at the senior positions, that gets to be a little bit different. That's where when we start talking about skills, we look for what we used to call it T-shaped individuals. Now the idea is more V-shaped. So people who are really deep in an area and then have a broadening experience up from that. So they have broad experience across a variety of topics, but they're deep. They're medium deep in some and really deep in a couple, right? You want those people who are not one dimensional. So at that point, you want to hire a V-shaped person that matches 70% of the skill set you need, and then you can develop the other 30%. But if you actually find that person who's going to bring the diversity and impact that your company needs, look for that first, and then start looking at the skill set.
Yeah, that's good. I would agree. Hope that helped, Roger.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the V shape. That was cool. Well, thank you, Roger and Sandra as well, and JL and John. This was so valuable, so inspirational and insightful.
Thanks,
thank you
Sophia.
so much for being on our
Yeah,
panel.
thank you for organizing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and we had some of our tech problems, but we did get a couple hundred signups. So we'll be sending the recording to everyone. And for anyone who bought the recording, I think Sandra, you did, we'll be sure to add on some extra gifts for you. But we do want to make sure all the people who signed up get an opportunity to see these. So yeah, that's it
Awesome.
for our first WkaGrowth Summit. So thank you again, everyone. And I hope you guys walked away with massive value. And I look forward to meeting up with you guys as well.
Yeah, I know I got value.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Well, have a great rest
care,
of your
everyone.
weekend, guys.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take
Thank you.
care.